Hello, I'm Robert Thiemann. I'm the founder and director of Frame. Welcome to another edition of Frame Live. Frame Live is our tool to navigate the post-pandemic landscape in spatial design. We have been exploring the workplace last week and hospitality spaces earlier this week. Today we will explore what post-pandemic of residential design will look like. We've got a very strict formula for that discussion, which will be all about images. Images submitted by our panel that I will introduce to you shortly. First of all, I'll take you through the program. After my brief introduction, we will start discussing around images submitted about pre-pandemic life during lockdown, the short-term future of residential design, and the long-term future, be that with or without the coronavirus or perhaps another virus. We don't know that. So we have to be able to adapt to that future, whatever it will hold. And at the end, there will be a discussion, and you're very much invited to submit questions to that discussion. You can do that by using the Q&A button at the menu bar of Zoom at the bottom. Type your question there and we'll look at it later on and try to answer as many questions as possible within the given time frame, which is, by the way, until 5 o'clock, give and take 5 or 10 minutes. So let me introduce to you our great panel for this afternoon. We've got Peter van Assche from Amsterdam. He is the founder of Bureau SLA, which is a very research-driven, hands-on, explorative, and Frame Award-winning architectural office with a strong circularity agenda. Then we have Giacomo Garziano, hailing from Italy, but also working from Amsterdam. He is the founder of GG Loop, another Frame Award-winning architectural agency specializing in residential spaces. Giacomo's portfolio goes from tables to entire urban landscapes. So it's very broad. And he has a particular interest in computational design. And last but not least, Kelsea, Crawford and Antonin Yuji Maeno of Cutwork from Paris. They replace a panel member that was supposed to be here, but unfortunately dropped out earlier today. So I'm very happy to be welcoming Kelsea and Antonin. And thank you for being so flexible, for being here with us today. Cutwork's work is very multidisciplinary and is all about creating furniture and spaces for the shared environment. So I'm very happy to show the panel to you. Here's the panel. Welcome, all of you. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Pretty good, Robert. Thank you for the invitation.
Well, thanks for being with us. I suggest we will start with having a look at your images, and we will start with the pre-pandemic state of affairs. So what does pre-pandemic residential design, or what does pandemic life stand for you, Peter? You have submitted this image. I think it's a pavilion that you co-created for Dutch Design Week, I think 2 years ago.
Yes, 2 years ago. Thank you, Robert, for having me here. And hi, everybody. It's great to be here. So this is the image that stands for me for our design attitude before the world went gaga. And it's all about designing for the human interaction, which was always spontaneous and easy. So this is, as you said, an image of the People's Pavilion, a design that we did with over Traders Bay in 2017, a few years ago, for the Dutch Design Week. And I noticed that, and when I look at this image, I see people hugging and sitting next to each other. And this was actually our main focus for design, how to provide gatherings for people, how to make spaces where you can be together, where you can communicate, and where human interaction are basic values. And this used to be our mindset, and this of course all changed.
Thank you, Peter. We move on to Giacomo. You send us this image. What does it represent for you?
Well, I could choose a lot of images, but if we start from the pandemic situation we are in, the only thing that I could really focus on is that there are conditions that we are experiencing now that became standards, and this one, well, everybody probably saw this video before, like Dr. Robert Kelly that was invited by BBC News to talk about the impeachment of the South Korean president. And suddenly his kids, they went into the room. So we are now, we got used to this kind of situation. I expect my cats to photobomb this video soon. And this to me inspired me quite a lot, because actually we as architects, we have strict rules, standards, norms to follow. And if we will follow strictly these standards, what we will get is a space that is most probably functional, but it doesn't have qualitative benefits. So that's why, based on this, I started researching in the last year already what could be, let's say, a paradigm that we could follow in order to design healthy environments, not only functionally correct, but also, nice to live in.
Well, this is certainly nice to live in, by the looks of the happy, what is it, son or daughter of this person?
Yeah, that's the daughter.
But well, he was not prepared for this being also his workspace. That's clear.
Mm.
Kelsea and Antonin, Paris. I'm looking at Paris in various states and various ages even.
You are. This is Paris in its glory somehow. Yeah, for me, really, somehow pre-pandemic is about the city being an extension of the living room. So basically in Paris, somehow beside kissing each other all the time in the streets, we go to terraces and outdoor spaces that really are the social space, the living room of the city. And even if in Paris, for most of us, the spaces in which we live in are quite small, like the apartments are pretty small. In fact, the city acts as the extension of the room. And I think that's kind of what we missed right now. Like we missed this primary function of the city during the pandemic.
And I agree. And I think it also showed the limitations of our personal space when we're so used to be able to going out into the city to fulfill our need to socialize, to work, to eat, to have entertainment. And suddenly we're forced to do all of it within our houses. We have a very different relationship to the city. So these images really show life, casual interactions. Like I think during pandemic, can we even imagine kissing someone random on the street? Never. I mean, maybe that's just a Parisian fantasy anyway, but.
Well, I hope we will soon get back to this state of life because, yeah, indeed, it's much more enjoyable than the current situation. Although I must admit that currently in Amsterdam, which has opened up to the public, let's say, about 1 week ago, that we are nearing this situation already. I don't know what that will mean for the corona outbreak. Maybe we will have a second wave coming soon. Anyway, then came corona. Then everything was in lockdown. Every country, every city, sooner or later went into a state of lockdown. So, Peter, you came up with this image as a representation of that period. Why is that, Peter? What does it represent to you?
So yes, I did. And when I thought of the lockdown period that we are all in now, I came up in my mind with this image of Christo and Jean-Claude, of course,
Who passed away quick?
who passed away last week, and this was after I chose the image. So this image has an actual meaning that is actually beyond what I intended to be. So why I chose it is that now in the lockdown period, we are all thinking about how to make separations, how to make divisions, how to make distance, and actually this was the most beautiful separation that I could come up with. It's this separation of a valley. This stands for me as like a metaphor for the lockdown period that we are in. And why is it a metaphor? That is because, of course, it shows separation. You cannot go from one part of the valley to the other part of the valley, but it's mostly a metaphor because it shows how beautiful separations can be. And I noticed that we as designers are thinking a lot about how to make separation or corona-proof environments. And of course, as designers, we are good at making, let's say, things beautiful, not only functional, but also beautiful. So we did some designs for a housing corporation. So how can we have meetings that are corona-proof? And it made me also a bit sad because the lockdown period stands for making beautiful separations, but they are beautiful maybe, but they are also separations. And of course, this is a bit also the sad news. And then I thought of their work, that Christo and Jean-Claude had a very social dimension to their work. So actually most of their work was based in public hearings, in community houses. They talked to the people living in these areas a lot. They talked to civil servants to have all the permissions and so on. So I thought, okay, this is the perfect metaphor because their work is about or shows separation. It shows even a beautiful separation, but actually the basics of their work, mostly in the early days, had a very social and a human dimension that actually I really loved. So it shows the state of the affairs that we are in now, but it also shows that we should never lose or forget the social issues and the social dimensions that, of course, makes our life as architects and designers worth living for. So for me, this is the perfect image of the lockdown that we are in now.
Separation in order to bring people together again.
Yeah.
Giacomo, is that Donald Trump?
Yeah, that's him. That's him. Well, during this lockdown period, I have to say I took quite some time to try to analyze this situation and try also to understand what we could learn from it. So while governments were all busy with trying to find the best measurements in a good, sometimes a bad way, actually what happened when we went into lockdown, what we experienced is that while the cities were taken over by wild nature, by wild animals. So I asked myself, what can we actually learn from it? Because in the end, before Corona, everybody was busy. Right before Corona, everybody was busy with Greta, the climate change. That was the big hot topic. Then we went into the fire in Australia, and then suddenly, somehow we always felt a bit detached from it, like if something was happening to the planet, not to us. So I think for the first time in a long time, actually, we acknowledge as a human species, we were actually in danger. So I think what we have to learn also from this period is actually that we are not detached from our planet. We are actually part of nature in a very fundamental way. We can't be, we shouldn't think anymore that we are the supreme species over the planet, but actually we are just we are just on this planet like any other animal or plant. So how can we learn from this situation and improve our environment?
Thank you. You have been really busy thinking about about the future. Kelsea and Antonin, this is very rural, very idyllic. it is far from gruesome, and doesn't have anything to do with separation by the looks of it.
Yeah, confinement was actually a really, really nice period somehow for us. That's the house where I spent the confinement, so you can see how spending there 2 months could have been for me, a very Parisian guy, a kind of version of nightmare at some point before that. But spending there 2 months was actually absolutely nice. I spent time in the garden. I walked quite a lot around the countryside. Also, I'm a bird watcher, so I've watched a lot of birds. I did some mini project with this. But also what I'd like to point out here is the central piece somehow, where I had to adapt the furniture and the elements for me to work there and to integrate these Zoom type of meeting there. And I think that's quite interesting somewhere in terms of design, on how two things. Number one, it will affect the countryside homes and their design, but also it will affect somehow something in the city, because if we don't use the offices that much, that means there's a lot of meter square that's going to be possible to repurpose into something else, for example, housing. So there's a weird swap there that is happening here. And that for me is encapsulated within this central image there with this yellow cushion of my mom over there. But I feel there is something there that is interesting. And also a bit like Giacomo, we spend quite a lot of time thinking and reading books about what it is to be in a crisis. How do we want to be living after this lockdown? Like this idea that is very spread everywhere that we shouldn't waste a good crisis somehow it was very in my mind. And I think, yeah, we came up with some points, some idea of how to experience the territory and the architecture post-confinement. I think we'll go down in the last of our slide there with this.
Thank you. I mean, you all three of you, you haven't been wasting your time by the looks of it. You have been thinking a lot. You have observed what people have done with their homes. You made some changes into your homes by the looks of it. What struck you most by having a look at all of the images that people have been posting on Instagram and other social media, all of the videos that you've seen? Giacomo, you presented this BBC News image. What struck you most that people have been doing when adapting to the lockdown situation? That's a very broad question, I know.
Yeah, I think it was very difficult for kids. I don't have kids, but I've been in contact with my nephew in Italy very, very often, and he does have brothers or sisters. For him, it was really, really tough. And I think the psychological impact that this situation is generating. We have no clue actually, how it's going to evolve in the future generation, because we somehow managed to adapt to it. You know, we moved our offices in our residential spaces, but then kids were actually, their focus is about enjoying life and playing with their peers. They were limited very drastically to that, without having really connection to the problem, without knowing, without grasping actually the cause of it. So I think for parents living with their kids in the house, I think it was a very difficult time, more than couples or other family situations.
As a parent, I can tell you, I completely agree with you. What struck me most is that, well, everybody I know, and from all of the stories I've heard and all of the imagery and video footage that I have seen, is that people really are an inventive species, and people are really flexible and adaptive, and instantly make the most of this situation. And of course, I'm generalizing completely, but as this image top center shows, you made the most of your home and you turned it into an office. And I think that is what millions and millions of people have been doing. And the question now is how to move on from this situation. And this is a bridge to the second part of our discussion, which is all about opening up again and looking at the implications of the pandemic for residential life in the short term. So Peter, you came up with these images. What do they mean?
Yes, I showed this image and to reflect on what you and Giacomo said earlier. It is that people became really inventive and creative in the lockdown period, and I also found myself in this situation, and I also found that actually you can communicate very well in this lockdown period. So I was teaching in the US and in Hong Kong at the same time, and then you have all these digital tools that actually make your life communicating mostly all day. But I must also admit that after 2 months, I went to my studio on my bicycle for the first time after weeks, and they had been very intensive weeks. I was Zooming actually most of my day, 6 days a week. And it was also like I woke up from a very weird dream. It was almost surreal to cycle on a real street, to see real people, to sort of smell real trees, to find that all your senses had been neglected all these days, locked up in this office that actually I'm in now, Zooming. So I thought inventive, yes, and it works, yes, and I was really enthusiastic also, but also I found that there were things missing in my life, and I didn't even notice so much that I was missing these things in my life. And this project that you see here is actually a really new project that hasn't been published anywhere. So it's also like a sort of a premiere for me, and I'm really happy to show it to you. And this is for me, a really nice project, but also an ironical project, because this project is a little bar, a little a tool for providing supplies for food trucks. So this is a little pavilion in Hoofddorp, in a very, let's say, boring, neglected office part of Hoofddorp. And the idea was that all these people that are working in these offices should go out in lunchtime and have food from a food truck, meet other people from other offices, and sort of make this space of interaction that now, as I see it now, actually is a really nice example of making and designing a safe environment in the 1.5 meter distance society that we start living in now, because food trucks are really safe. You can enjoy your meal outside the safe, and this pavilion could have been, or is, or would have been the perfect solution for new ways of thinking about having lunch in a safe environment and providing all the tools that you need for it. The irony being, of course, first of it being that it was designed before such a thing as Corona even existed. Pandemia was far away. And the second thing is that yes, this is a perfect solution for this 1.5 meter society that we start living in now. But all these offices directly after finishing this became empty. So there were no food trucks, no users, nobody. So it was standing there by itself, and these images were taken in this Corona time period. So for me, the short-term opening up, this was the perfect example of a really good solution that is useless now, but might prove its existence and its worth, hopefully in the upcoming months when we enter the new 1.5 meter society.
It's a way of celebrating the outdoors again. So we've been talking previously about the city serving as an extension of people's living rooms, and you could see this as an extension of an office, maybe also from a living room. And in that regard, it would be back to the old state, back to the old normal.
Exactly, yeah. Thanks.
Giacomo, this is a speculative project, I think. It has not been realized yet. What is it?
Not yet, exactly. Yeah, I would like to reconnect a bit with what you said, Robert, inventiveness, flexibility, and also what you said, Peter, you know, the function that is, yeah, I imagine actually new cities that bring actually inside residential spaces, also the public space. I was struck by one sentence by the Prime Minister of Singapore once said, we don't want the garden in the city, but we want the city in the garden. That's the feeling I think I would like to achieve in my future residential project. And this is actually, this was born as, this is also actually a surprise for Frame and for Frame's audience. We didn't publish this project yet because it's an ongoing project, which is, as you say, Robert, is speculative for the moment, but it's actually a residential project can be applied. It's a system, actually. It's a parametric urban design tool that is based on the CLT construction and can be applied at very different urban scale. So it means also small family units till large projects like this one that you see, that actually has the goal to merge in a balanced ecosystem, nature and human being. And yeah, because I always had this idea that so far we be using the paradigm, the word as a machine, something that it was also somehow predicted by the archigram in the 60s with the project Walking City. I imagine instead to renew this paradigm, to create a new one that is actually based on the word as an organism paradigm. So this project is actually called mitosis. It represents a point of the tissue growth when the cells split, actually. So new chromosomes are created. And I think these images, this reference for me represents what the future of residential should be. And these are actually all flexible spaces. You are talking about, let's say, innovative spirit within the house. All these spaces can be converted from residential to office spaces without any actual limitation, because also the structured grid can allow that to happen. And all of these are sustainable in terms of energy. And going back to the standards I was referring to at the beginning, that so far all the norms that we have, all the regulations, they give us a quantitative measurements. We've been applying the biophilic design principles actually to develop a scale, like a qualitative scale, also in our project. And this is something that I would like to, yeah, I'm happy to share with Frame and Frame's audience.
Thank you, Giacomo. It looks very idyllic to me, and I hope that we will be living in the midst of nature in future cities. I really hope that, and it would be beneficial to the planet and beneficial to people, a much more healthy environment. Kelsea and Antonin, for the near future, you came up with these images. Again, your piece of adaptive furniture, but other than that, what do we see?
Yeah, so I think I'll go ahead and start. I think what's been really interesting for us during COVID is looking at how the world is seeing something that was really fundamental in our design practice for the last few years. So our company was built around the idea that together has changed. And our design practice has always been aiming to be in conversation with that and on the forefront of how architecture for shared environments is being designed. And from the very beginning, flexibility, modularity, and adaptability have always been kind of the key pillars of our design practice, which is something that's very common in the world of shared architecture, and particularly co-living. And I only see this becoming more relevant in a world post-COVID, both in the short term and in the long term, because in the space of a few short months together has certainly changed, I think in ways more radical than any of us could have predicted. And it's as if kind of a conversation we've been having with a very niche set of people and designers about this type of like hybrid flexible space is becoming much more relevant. I think we've all modified our spaces and found new rhythms, turned attics and patios into offices, had to, in a very small space, accommodate all of our daily functions. And as Anto mentioned earlier, without the city as an extra room, we've been forced to do all of our activities in one small space. So suddenly, I think the importance and the spotlight is on how the interior space is going to be designed and how we can be much more intentional about it to make it actually fulfill the needs that we need every day, such as workspace in the home. I think one of the factors that's going to come into play with the transformation of work is that many people will work from home. Which means that suddenly people will, I believe, want a more intentional home office setup. As you see here, this is a very unintentional home office setup, which worked for a few months and was charming, but for a year, you think you'd get kind of tired of this setup. So I think as designers, we're also looking at how might we design, how might we design a kit of furniture that's very much adapted for how people are using it today. It's, as you mentioned, Robert, in the web series 2 weeks ago, the office is coming into the home, but it won't look like the office as we know it today. It needs to be refined. It needs to have some different flavor to it to really meet how we use it today. And I think for me, that's looking at short term.
Yeah, that's kind of this kit idea of how I could take this setup that is quite organic, let's say, and turn it into an intentional kit that would fulfill all what Kelsea just presented. And yes, somehow together is always changing. We're just all agreeing on that right now these days. There's kind of a bigger agreement, an umbrella agreement. Even we need to reinvent this kind of weird hand gestures that we have to greet. So when that's touching this kind of everyday ritual, there's a lot of game for design here. There's a lot of, that's how design emerged, no? When like you have new behaviors, new rituals, then you need objects for that.
And I think that's probably just to close and to finish that statement. It's as if current modes of housing are losing relevance today. You know, for the traditional family where work and home life are very separate, today we're seeing everything becoming much more fluid and much more blurry. So how do we design intentional spaces if the challenge of the last century or so is designing to build vertically and to build more densely? I think we believe that the challenge of the next century is going to be how do we design spaces that are much more elastic in their usages and that are much more flexible in how they're thought of, because there's usages emerging that we can't even imagine right now. And as designers, I think it's really important to leave space for this to express itself.
So you're speaking about adaptive space, flexible space within buildings, but you, all three of you, also are very aware of the fact that the city will play an increasingly important role in the residential lives of people, in terms of the city being an extension of their homes. So let's have a look at the long-term future, which will be living with a virus or without a virus. Will that be the coronavirus? Will that be another virus? We don't know, but key is that we have to be ready for whatever will be coming in the nearby future. I think that is the biggest learning from the coronavirus, that we haven't been ready for this, and we haven't been flexible when it comes to the design of furniture and homes and offices and even cities. But we have now learned that we need to prepare for this kind of event happening in the future. We don't know when it will come and what it will look like, but something will come. That's, I think that is what the virus period has made clear. So what will the long-term future of residential design look like, Peter?
Yes, Robert. So I think the words that you say now are right on spot. Are right in their meaning. This is exactly what is needed and what we were not prepared for before, of course. And you could ask yourself, okay, how could we? And I'm showing this image. This is a sort of an intermediate image, and I just took it from our desk, so to say, and I want to share this with you as a sort of a first step in hopefully an open discussion that we can have afterwards in the remaining half an hour. This is a design that we are working on, and as I said, you just see a preliminary image somewhere for an elderly home in Amsterdam, in the Watergraafsmeer. So it's an area in Amsterdam, and this will be a new home for like say 180 older people, 180 residents. So this is of course a vulnerable group. So all the issues, Robert, that you mentioned are magnified in this building, and this design of course started before we were asking all these questions that you are asking now, and that we all are asking, and it made us think, is the design that we made, is it future proof for these unexpected pandemia that will come, might come, maybe will not come? I don't know, nobody knows. But if you start thinking about it, it becomes really interesting, because what we wanted to do with this building, of course, obviously, is facilitate a human contact. So for elder people, it is vital and really important that you stay in touch with your relatives, that you stay in touch with each others, that you stay in touch with humans, that you don't become a lonely person sitting in your room behind a door that is closed. So if you want to facilitate human contact, now suddenly we have to ask ourselves, is this contact safe? And if we want to provide and design safe contact, maybe we should come up with new solutions. So, but to start with, the difficult things is we designed a gate because it makes you feel safe. But what does a gate mean in these times? It should be a safe gate. We designed an outside space. How should this outside space look like in a safe time? We designed corridors, but should we make the elevators in one spot, or should we make elevators in 3 places that it's always safe, that you can use multiple elevators? Should we think of making a one-way route? Yes or no? And these are all very, I realize when I'm telling you this, are all very practical issues, but they might have a substantial and widespreading design, and what will happen. And I think this is really interesting. Actually, it will give us new typologies of living, new modes of living inside and outside, and that is of course really interesting. So one of the things that we started designing is maybe we should provide every house with these old farm doors, right? You have these old farm doors. You can open one part of the farm door. You don't have to open the whole door. You can open just the upper half as used in old farms. And then you could design a seating spot or a sitting place in front of this door, your front door, and also in your own house. So you can sort of hang over this door and talk safely with your neighbor who happens to walk on the corridor. Or maybe we should make large windows with opening parts that are large, that you can actually sit and hang in your window and talk to your neighbor who also hangs out of his or her window, so you can communicate safely in times when you cannot touch each other. And all these notions made me think, and made our studio also think, okay, we have to reconsider this whole thinking about how interaction between people, and especially of course elderly people, is shaped. The implications start easy, of course. How safe is a gate? I don't know. I mean, we can solve this, but we are not interested in solutions. We are interested in new visions of the future and the new visions of living together. So this project exemplifies for me all all the issues that we will meet sooner or later in designing living environments, not just for elderly people, not just for vulnerable people, but actually for you and me also, for everybody.
Peter, do you foresee the end of the high rise in cities?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. So we might have to design high rises with lots of elevators. So it will definitely not be the end of the high rise, but there will be new topologies. I am sure of that. But what they look like, I don't know yet.
Thank you. Giacomo, nature.
Yeah, it's nice to see what Peter is busy with, because it's topics that we've been dealing with also with the project that I showed before, mitosis. And yeah, because I truly believe that yeah, we have to look at nature, and we have to build up a new value system based on the respect towards our planet and our environment. So yeah, we've been using, well, this image for me means basically everything. You see like a built environment strictly connected to nature. If you destroy one, the other one wouldn't survive, most probably. So that it's a metaphor that for me represents actually what my practice is busy with at the moment. And yeah, as I mentioned before, we use biophilic design principles. Actually, I don't know if you're familiar with the topic. Biophilia was let's say brought up in the 80s by Edward Wilson, and together with Stephen Keller, they actually studied. Biophilia means love for living systems, so means other people, means flora, means fauna, means everything, means actually the planet, and that's what we've been missing so far, I think. So yeah, by using these biophilic design principles, they are divided actually in nature in space, but also analog of nature, and then the nature of space. We can actually create space with certain qualitative elements that make our life better, our health much better, improves our well-being. That is actually something that we will probably need anyway in the future. This Corona crisis taught us quite a lot. But I don't want
to very much, Giacomo. It's again inhabitable nature that you present here, in sync with your previous project.
Do you guys know the Meghalaya Living Bridge? Do you know what that is, Giacomo?
Yeah, I know it. Yeah,
it's a system of bridge that is built with fig roots, and there is a tribe in the Meghalaya, this is in India, and they build actual bridges that you can walk on with the roots of these plants. I always love that project. So, sorry, Robert.
Thank you, Antonin. Now we have you here. Tell us more about this image. It's again a nature-heavy image. It's very idyllic. It looks like a city, or is it a village? I don't know.
Is there a way you zoom in a little bit in the drawing? This is during the confinement. We've been making 5 points of what we believe would be interesting to explore post-pandemic, and this is the first one. I think we'll release the other ones later. And this is called liquid territory. So it's kind of this idea of using the territory in a more flexible, in a more liquid way. Maybe Kelsea, I feel you'll say that well.
Sure. Well, I think we can echo what Giacomo is saying. We really believe that the future of design is integrated with nature and city, with rural and urban. And this is something that we're really interested in exploring. And the idea of liquid territory really plays to that. It's imagining that we might live in a future where we spend some time in the city and some time in a rural area, and we're no longer confined one or the other, thanks to increasing modes of transport, increasing availability of remote work. For example, during confinement, 1 out of every 4 people in France, in Paris, left the city to go to other places. And we saw this similar urban exodus in many major cities around the world. So it begs the question, how valuable are our cities if we leave them in times of crisis? And how might we facilitate communication between rural and urban without it being so polarized? That's really how we imagine liquid territories evolving.
Yes. So what if, for example, you'd spend 3 weeks in the city with your girlfriend, and then you go 1 month in a countryside with a group of 10 people, and then you go in another city with a friend, and then you go alone for 4 months somewhere in retreat somewhere. And that's this idea of using the territory as a way more liquid element. I think, Giacomo, that's what you meant also maybe somewhere when you said something about walking city, you know, the archigram project. Well, there's this idea that the city moves in the territory as in with legs, like a big insect. But that's kind of what we can do now, just in the same logic that with the not having a garden city, but a city that is in the garden. That's kind of the same idea. We can move into the territory and bring us within the liquidity of it somehow.
And I think that moving back to this analogy of insects, we imagine this as sort of like grasshopper movements, hopping from place to place for periods of time. And this perhaps is a shift in society in this long time debate between rural and urban, maybe beginning to show different facades. And I think I was personally super inspired by City Quitters, Robert. I read this between the Frame Awards and confinement. And I think this is a great example of these trends that are only accelerating in a post-pandemic world.
And so we are brewing these days at the studio a project that we call Liquid Home that will release soon, that is exploring the architectural implementation of that liquid territory idea.
Okay, now we thank you very much and propose to live more integrated with nature within cities, in rural areas. So we'll bring the conversation to all of us, open up to all of us. Yeah, so we've been talking about the future of residential design, and as far as I'm concerned, you focus a lot on actually the city life. Now, what if we take a look at the smallest components, the home? What is the future of the home if we will continue working from home? So if remote living is here to stay, and I think it's safe to say that. I mean, we did a poll here at Frame. We are 15 here working from the office normally. These days it's only 3 or 4, and almost everybody sees a future in which they will work 50% from home and 50% from the office. And I think all of you brought up a similar sentiment. So that will mean indeed that the office will become partly vacant, and that on the other hand, the home will double as a workspace. That has big implications for homes. How do you see that progressing, the home, in this future?
There's a lot of implication, again, both in the city tower office block and on the home, on the apartment, or on the rural home. Right now we're doing a project like that for a developer in France who has asked us to rethink their office tower to turn them into a home, like a housing. How can we transform these big towers into a domestical space? And I think the same question can be asked on how should we redesign home, like houses, like countryside houses, to be able to accommodate for work, and that without losing a piece of ourselves, like without having this blending of work and living too much together. Like, what is the architectural aspect of that?
And to make the question even more complicated, in cities, the population is still growing. Well, perhaps not now, but pre-pandemic, the population of cities was still growing, and spaces were increasingly smaller and more unaffordable for people. So that's a really bad state of affairs when you look at residential living in cities. So smaller spaces for more people with higher prices attached to them, but they should be doubling as workspaces. How do we fix that? And that I'm seeing a question coming up from Kamp in the audience. How do we do that? How do we blend work and living in a healthy way? What can designers do to make that happen, to facilitate that?
Yeah, I think, Robert, actually it's, oh, sorry, Peter, you want to go first?
Well, there's a lot to say, but Jack, you go first, and then I'll tell you the story about the end of modernism.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Sounds interesting.
You need to be 5:15. Don't forget.
I'll try to be very concise then. But I think it's not really about a matter of size of the space, but actually the size it shouldn't be that important. It's about optimization of the space. We have to be able actually to work from our living environment. So it's about designing a space that is flexible enough that can give us the feeling that we are shifting from one space to the other. In terms of cost, actually, the prices are going up. That's a very interesting topic to discuss, and I think governments and the cities, they have to support this, because yeah, I completely agree. And there's also another thing. I think one of the co-living statement is actually that you could have within one building shared spaces where actually people could gather and also work together. So
this is the territory of Antonin and Kelsea, shared spaces where people live and work together, which has become a health hazard, co-living, or not?
Oh, Robert, come on now. No, this is a great question. And I think, again, it taps into the principles of design for co-living or shared architecture, shared space. And this is what people really like about co-living, is that what you trade off in exchange for a smaller private space is access to more shared public spaces that are kind of a third place, where you can go to work, where you can go to have a phone call. So you really get the two levels of intimacy. You know, you have your first level, which is your maybe 15 to 20 square meter small bedroom. Then you share a kitchen, or you share a living room, or you share a workspace. So I think this is going to have a lot of ramifications in the design of shared space, but it's also going to influence residential and how we're designing for that, because I think the name of the game, and as what you said, you know, not only are prices going up in cities, but meter square reducing drastically. You know, for the last 50 years in Europe, a 3-bedroom apartment in Europe was average of 75 square meters. And in the last 10 years alone in France, this has dropped to 60 square meters. So price of square meters has risen drastically, yet we're bargaining for less. So where do we go? You know, how do we remain close to home, not have hour-long commutes, but find spaces outside of the home designed to be an extension of the home? I think this is an interesting question.
Now, Peter, the end of modernism.
Yes, the end of modernism. So these are interesting things, but you have to remember that also the tendency over the last 100 years is that actually we live with fewer people. So there are a lot of one-person households in bigger spaces. So if you look 100 years back, people lived in a 40 square meter home with 5 people. I'm not saying that this is sort of an ideal situation. It might be actually a very dangerous situation, but this is where we come from. So it's also true that we stopped sharing spaces when we became individuals, and we needed more space for your home as an individual. So it might be there might be a new wave of sharing and actually reversing this tendency in a smarter way. And by the end of modernism, I meant that the idea that we should have separate spaces for separate functions is, of course, a very modernistic idea. You would have separation of functions. This is the place where I work. This is the place where I have leisure, where I recreate, and this is the place where I live. And you can see this reflected in our zoning plans. Our zoning plans are actually really stupid, because it's a map, and then one square is colored blue, one square is colored yellow, and one square is colored, I don't know, red. So red means office. You can make an office. You can design office here. Green is you can design a house here. And it has this sort of naive notion, and it's still in all our zoning plans. Imagine that okay, now I go home. The law tells me I go home. I open my front door. I'm entering the red space, and the red space says, okay, from now on I start living. Then the morning I leave my home, I go to a blue square on the map. This is called office building. I open this building and say, okay, from now on, I start working. And this is, of course, a very naive, totally stupid way of dividing life in functions. And what we see now, and this is what I would call the end of modernism, is that our lives are much more subtle, much more diverse, much more interesting, that in one space I can live, work, recreate, have fun, have parties, have maybe even a bar, do lots of things. And we should think of the end of modernism as an opportunity of making life more interesting in our designs of residential spaces. Yeah.
It's interesting that one of the people in our audience comes up with a series that is on Apple TV, apparently. I don't know it. It's called the Home series, and he says that it's Corey Washik. Thank you for that, Corey. The Hong Kong episode is interesting because it speaks about that liquidity and flexibility that you're currently addressing. And to jump to another question from the audience, it's by Ralus Jaroslavna Lange. What about the use of VR? Do you think it will be more common to use technologies like that in everyday life for work? So that you can stay within your living room or even your bathroom if you like, or you can lie in bed with your VR headset on and you can then participate in work meetings. How do you see that?
Well, we have seen a lot of that now.
Yeah, it's already happening now. Yeah, we are experiencing that a lot. I think also sales went up in for this technology.
Yeah, they are getting so much cash these days. This Zoom, this Skype, all this. They're gonna go into somewhere also hardware thinking. You know, like not only the virtual space, but what are the objects in the houses or the spaces within the houses or in the city where you can explore that. I mean, that's kind of what I think when I think of that.
But also, I must tell this story again, is that yes, we do use this technology, and I am very enthusiastic about all the possibilities that actually we see now. I mean, look at this. Did you imagine this happening 1 year ago? It would be hard, right? Or it would be possible, but nobody would attend it. So now we see a radical change. But then again, this story, after 2 months, I left my home and I cycled through the city, and I was overwhelmed, actually a bit emotional, overwhelmed by all the experiences of my senses, the smell, the sound, the touch, all the people, the feeling. I felt like, oh, I'm waking up from a dream. So yes, we can make technology and we can make this space where we can communicate, but it's also a bit, I think, of a dream, and at one day we will all wake up at some point.
But I think the two are actually complementary, because if we can use technology to optimize certain processes and have more time for ourselves to experience the city, to go on a bike, as you said, and enhance our multi-sensory experience of our environment, then I think it's very beneficial technology.
There is a question from Marianne Santiago. Do you think the control of density is necessary for multifamily dwellings? In Asia, an average 2-bedroom unit is about 50 square meter. Does it need to be bigger, or do we need to limit the number of units per floor? I think this is intended to speak about livability on the one hand, but also safety on the other hand.
And sharing.
And sharing,
as Antonin and Kelsea talked about.
Yes, somehow I think what you told us about the end of modernity, which is really true, this zoning, the idea of zoning is a weird modern idea. But that came also, that was really linked, I think, with the traditional family, the mononuclear family, 2 kids with 2 children living for the whole life that way. That was really linked to a certain way of modernity and a certain way of thinking about space. But this model is completely crashing down. So just to give you an example, in Munich only, this represents 14% of the households. But that's really not a lot. So that means with the end of the mononuclear family, somehow, I think this is also the end of a modern aspect of space. There will be a way more flexible understanding that is after the family. And maybe that is what this question of the 50 meters square comes to. Like, what is the amount of meters square? What is the typologies? What is the design? What is the flexibility that it will go with a non-traditional family, but more like a chosen family or a single household that is always changing? That's still an exploration to be made. And of course, there will be crazy bad experiments with this, but we hope that we're here to make the good ones happen somehow.
So we've been talking a lot this afternoon about the city life, the city as an extension of people's homes, the city as an extension of the office, perhaps, that we should be living more in sync with nature. But cities currently are not an ideal place. They're very busy, they're densely populated. How can cities, or how should cities adapt to become more livable and more affordable for people to live in? What should happen to the city of the future?
Well, so I mentioned that before. I'm a bird watcher. Personally, I watch birds. And there is a very interesting philosopher that's also a tracker who tracks animals, who's called Baptiste Morisot. And he talks about the fact that we see these days, the modern type of space is seeing city as a background, as a decor somehow for our lives, as something that we can go pick up on, but also that happens to be pretty nice to walk around. But that idea of a decor is kind of strange. It's pretty strange. To give you just an idea, there's a study that has been made in America that showed that children of under 10 years old can actually recognize around 100 logo of brands in a split second, but like they cannot recognize more than 5 leaves of trees around. So that gives you an idea of this attention span where this has shifted somewhere. And so for me, I think we can really rethink the city by understanding, by breaking a very conceptual mistake that we make. And this mistake goes with,
For you, modern city life.
And yeah, modern city life. And yeah, I think that globally there is a kind of an occidental mistake here that is happening, and it's we misinterpret original, natural, and artificial. These are three big ideas that are weirdly used. Somehow we believe that natural is a synonym for original, and we think that artificial is to be opposed to natural. And I think if we break that kind of triangle here, we might be able to think about our cities differently and to see nature not as a decor, but as something that is part of us.
How do we get there?
Well, we're doing a project that is a small scale or something. We're doing kind of a bird wall project these days, which is a kind of a structure that we've made to be able to implement different type of habitats for birds, for insects, and for plants, to reactivate biodiversity and to make sure that basically buildings are like put up in the city like trees to reactivate the biodiversity. And I think Giacomo, the image that you show, is exactly in that direction, both the root and your project that is an encapsulation of that.
And if I just say one phrase to close what Anto said, I think the future is shared. The future of cities is shared. And this is how we help with the affordability challenge. It's how we improve quality of life to give access to people who without sharing couldn't have the means to access higher quality of space. I think this is a really big component of the future of our cities.
That is, sharing has to be designed, and I think this is where designers come in. So now the division between your own private space and the public space is very hard. So I go out of my front door, I am in the public space, and this is this space that is for everybody. But if we start thinking about different modes and different ways and different ways of sharing that might be more or less public or might be in this intermediate zones. We can design actually a lot of the cities that is very helpful for different needs, different uses and different activities. And there's a lot, I think, to gain there.
Well, thank you all for your candidness, your visions, for sharing your experiences. I can come up with my most important takeaways from this discussion is that we will probably see the end of modernism, as Peter told us, but maybe also the end of the high-rise, because high-rises are difficult to navigate without health hazards. We need to design for separation, but then prevent people feeling lonely. So we, on the other hand, at the same moment, need to design for collective experiences, and we need to design to unite people. So that's a very, well, it's a great paradox, actually. We need to design for separation, but at the same moment for to unite people. Then the homes and the workspaces and cities of the future need to become really much more flexible and adaptable to unexpected circumstances, be it pandemics or people leaving the city or any other change that we don't know of and that will come upon us. The city will therefore need to function as an extension from our homes, but also as an extension of the workspace. Nature needs to be much more integrated into the cities of the future. I probably forgot one or two very important takeaways, but we will post this a recording of this discussion probably at the beginning of next week on FrameWeb. So if you're interested in looking back, please visit FrameWeb and look for a recording of today's session of Frame Live. Panel, Peter, Antonin, Kelsea, Giacomo, thank you very much for being with us today. I think, Peter, we made your deadline. You need to jump into another Zoom meeting. Good luck with that. Audience, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you very much for your engaged questions. I hope to see you anytime soon, and take care, all of you. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.